Hi, everybody. Good morning. So I'm very excited to be talking to two groups of creators. And the first two are JT Rogers. Can you please come up on stage, JT? Who is the creator and showrunner of Tokyo Vice. Hi. And Alan Poul, who is the EP and our director. Hi, guys.
Hi. Hey.
Hi. We're close. When we started, this was one of the first shows that I bought when I was beginning the slate of programming for Max at the time, HBO Max, who knows what. We were actually called the DTC at that time when I bought Tokyo Vice. That's how far back it goes.
I didn't even know that.
Yeah, the direct-to-consumer. Wow. It's a sexy name. And I think originally what grabbed me and said, yes, this should be one of our first shows, was not only the chance to go to Japan. And that was a big decision about, okay, we're going to go shoot this whole thing in Japan. And Alan can do a deep dive about all the challenges of that. But also, JT, you had a very personal connection to this material. And I don't know if you guys know this, but Tokyo Vice is a book that has been floating around Hollywood for a long time. I mean, I feel like it should have been a storyline in Entourage. It was like one of those great, the ones that got away, books that, finally was getting made. And I think that, and we can talk too about how I think it ended up being a much better television series than a movie because you were able to tell this very expansive story. But you, JT, have a personal connection to it. So do you want to share that with us?
Yeah, so the memoir is by Jake Adelstein, who is, as in the series, the first ever and only Westerner to write in Japanese for a Japanese newspaper, and he's covering the crime beat and gets deeply enmeshed with the Yakuza. And Jake and I grew up together in central Missouri. We met in driver's ed. And when we were in high school, I said, I think I'm going to go to New York and go into the theater and go from there. It's like, oh, that sounds great. I said, what are you going to do? I'm going to go to Japan and learn Japanese and live there. It's like, yeah, that's not going to happen. And he did. And he had this extraordinary life. And we would stay in touch as you do with old friends. You'd speak every couple of years and you'd just fall back into the friendship. And I was walking my dogs in Brooklyn years ago now, because as we all know how long it takes to get a hoped-for movie, now even better series of Tokyo Vice made. He called me, and I was like, hey, dude, it's been so long. How are you? And he didn't want to do any chatter. And he said, okay, have you been getting threatening phone calls in Japanese? And I had to pause and say, I'm a little embarrassed. I have gotten calls in Japanese on my voicemail. I just assumed they were wrong numbers. I really did. And I thought he'd laugh, and he was dead silent. And he said, very quietly, I'm so sorry. And I said, why? He said, I've discovered the worst secret about the worst Yakuza boss in Tokyo. He now knows, is threatening my life, and has stolen my address book, and is calling and threatening all the people I love most. And the dual response of like, oh, and let's start from the beginning. So that is the origin story of it.
I mean, and Alan, I think that just to kind of toss it to you in that context, it was daunting to go into Japan to make this. And I do think there were some potential security issues just to, remind everybody early on a Saturday morning, I don't know how caffeinated everyone is, that, the story about Jake's life in Tokyo and becoming this investigative reporter for essentially the equivalent of the New York Times in Japan, and him following the crime beat of the Yakuza, the organized crime of Japan. And he really was truly in their crosshairs. So to go back into that culture just with that kind of hanging over. And then in addition, Japan is notoriously difficult to film in. But Alan, you were very well suited for this challenge.
If you say so.
I do.
Yeah, Tokyo is notoriously the most difficult major metropolis to film in. And I actually began my career many years ago because I had gotten my college degree in Japanese literature, and I was drafted to work on 2 films that were shot in Japan, Paul Schrader's Mishima and then Ridley Scott's Black Rain. And Black Rain was such a horrifying experience, we basically got kicked out of Japan. We got kicked out of 2 cities in Japan. And the birth of the first Japanese...
What did you do, Alan? Why did you get kicked out of 2 cities?
No, ask Sherry Lansing, she'll tell you. But as the first Japanese Film Commission was actually born out of the debacle of the Black Rain shoot. So I kind of said, I'm not going to be the Japan guy, and pursued a career for 25 years as a producer and director here. And then I got the call about Tokyo Vice from Joe Hips and Chris Rice at 5th Season. And it seemed, and I've known JT for years, I've known Jake for years, and it seemed like the right time to strap it on and try to go back. And we made headway in Tokyo in being able to shoot things in the streets of Tokyo that no one's ever done, that no Japanese company has ever done. And so just overcoming the bureaucratic challenges in terms of the way Japanese society is structured was one daunting challenge. But on top of that, we were telling a story about the Yakuza, which is still, even though there are many Yakuza movies in Japan, they walk a very clear boundary about what they can do and cannot do. And because we were doing a story based on real people, there were problems and there were threats, and we lost our entire first production company because they got cold feet. And I just got back last night from Tokyo. I know that Sarah just come back from Paris, so we're in the sort of jet lag Olympics here. But I had dinner 2 nights ago with our head location manager from the shoot, who finally, a year after we finished shooting, confessed to me how he felt that he was in bodily danger at several times during the shoot, even while we were actually being very successful at negotiating and making things happen. So it's still a real thing.
Well, and I think just to kind of continue down this path a little bit, because I do think one of the real pleasures of the show is the sprawl of life in Japan that you all represent. And I want to talk in a second about the cast and the storylines and the actors. But first, just going back to, as you said, the locations, going from season 1 to season 2, Alan is being very modest. I do think he could run for mayor of Tokyo and win.
He is a official diplomat.
I am a Tokyo tourism ambassador. I didn't bring my business card, but yeah.
But I think, what was it that you think finally cracked through for them? Because I imagine part of it is the respect with which you engaged with the culture and how you showcased it.
It's just riffing off of what Alan was saying, and a somewhat blunt analogy is a bit like there was a lot of people when The Godfathers were made, not to equate us quality-wise, but and they were not happy that film was being made, and when they saw it, they're like, oh, gee, we love this film. So I think, Elma, we would sit down during season 1, and I'd say, look, you don't know me, we're foreigners, we know how horrible our track record is. All I can do is say, please give us a chance, trust us. I will tell a story that will make everyone a 3-dimensional, complicated human being. And I think that's all ultimately you can do, is to make a show that doesn't patronize, that doesn't 2-dimensionalize, and that treats everyone as complicated as you would want to see yourself on the screen.
Yeah, we did do a lot of very painstaking work behind the scenes with the police, with local government, with members of parliament. But the real sea change was between seasons 1 and 2, because season 1, we were these gaijin, foreigners, outsiders coming in, and based on the track record, there was every reason for the Japanese to assume we would get everything wrong. And so it was a big struggle. And then in between seasons 1 and 2, the show aired on Wow Wow, our broadcaster in Japan, and was a big hit and was also received as being genuinely authentic. And so we came back season 2 and we got invited to the mayor's office and we got invited to the U.S. Embassy, and suddenly we went from being pariahs to being VIPs overnight. And so it's really because the work spoke for itself.
And I think not only was it the two of you, but I also would love to kind of hear a little bit about how Ansel embraced Japanese culture and the work that he did to represent Jake there.
Yeah, I mean, we were really fortunate. This sounds terrible, but sort of creatively, aside from the horribleness for all of us as human beings, the shutdown of the world was really helpful for the show. because Ansel.
So how much had you shot before?
We'd only shot a few.
6 days.
6 days.
6 days.
6 days. And
it was a very real conversation. Just to take everybody back there, we were very worried that you all were all going to get stuck there.
Yeah,
And it was
yeah.
quite an urgent, and I know there was some thought about continuing to shoot because, as you all know, in Asia, there is a culture of masking and continuing on with life, but it was becoming apparent that this was not going to be normal. And so we were, really concerned about getting everybody out. And then there was this great pause in shooting.
8 months.
8 months. And, Ansel originally had come in signed on to do the part and was learning his lines, phonetically for the pilot because he has a musical ear and, we didn't have that much time. And he thought, like a lot of actors, well, I can do that. And once he started actually shooting and realizing, and Alan can speak more specifically to it, that you can't do that with Japanese. That you change the intonation and it changes the entire sentence. So he just spent hours and hours every day and through the great pause and then continued on. And so his Japanese is really quite good, and that I think really helps with the authenticity for the Japanese audience. And Rachel Keller, who plays Samantha, same thing for her. She spent an endless hours and work to be able to do that. And what it does as the storyteller is it's fantastic because it allows me to make the show even more fluid, going back and forth between Japanese and English, because you want that reality where the audience stops paying attention to when someone is speaking Japanese in their subtitles, when they're speaking English and not. And sometimes, we create very specific rules about which character, the hierarchy of the relationship. You and I are talking, you're hierarchically higher, so you get to choose when we switch languages. None of this is ever explained in the show, but I'm a big believer that if you create a very distinct set of rules and build the world properly, the audience just knows. The audience knows you're in good hands. And they both have done fantastic work with that.
Ansel, I went to a very good Japanese language school in Tokyo when I was in college and spent a year there. And I still think it's the best language training program outside of the military or the diplomatic corps. And so I went there and got a teacher from my alma mater to work with Ansel. And they bonded in such an incredible way. His teacher is Homa Sensei. Ansel's 6'4", 6'5". Homa Sensei's about 5'4". Homa Sensei also never wears Western clothes. He wears hakama, the traditional Japanese version of trousers, and a little overcoat. And they became constant buddies and became this kind of famous Mutt and Jeff odd couple seen around the streets of Tokyo. And were inseparable, but it really paid off in terms of the depths of Ansel's understanding of Japanese.
Well, and I think, just speaking to, again, what I loved so much when you pitched the show to us originally was you had this endpoint in mind. And so we had 2 seasons worth, but you knew where you were ending. And it, I think, allowed you to build this very large canvas of characters because they were so precisely placed in the story. It was very easy to follow their arc and become engaged with them. So do you want to just talk briefly about that?
Yeah, no, you guys were so great about that. In hindsight, you sort of sit back and go, wow, they did that? They let me do that? Yes, you can have the entire first season end on nothing but cliffhangers. Yes, after you've talked through season 2, yes, we'll give you 2 extra episodes because I really wanted to land this story part of the show. And so it was an incredible gift and sort of a North Star to go, we'd meet, like the actress who plays Mrs. Tozawa, who is so extraordinary. She has a very tiny part in season 1, and she's an estimable artist. And so I sat with her and I said, I know that this is a part that far beneath your talents, and I can't tell you what, but trust me, you're going to be very, very important in the next season if you'll come with us. And she did. And so the joy of being able to sort of set seeds in season 1, and there's moments where there's a reference to something in episode 4 in season 1 that I knew wouldn't come back until episode 7 of season 2. And to know that you had the luxury of having that ability to know you'd have the 2-season arc was really wonderful.
Yeah. And I wonder, Alan, just kind of speaking to that and directing, American and then Japanese actors, what was kind of one of the interesting learnings for you and blending everyone together while, working in the streets of Tokyo? I mean, it's a high wire act.
It's a big high wire act, and I have to say, for me, the greatest pleasure was because I speak Japanese and I had studied it in school, but it had been many years. And so getting back to the place where I was able to direct entirely in Japanese was like, that was a high that I didn't expect to ever have. And And because Ansel and Rachel understand by season 2 were understanding everything, and everybody else in the cast was Japanese, really the set functioned entirely in Japanese. And so I was able to function as a Japanese director. But beyond that, I think that, especially in season 2, because the way into the show in season 1 is obviously through the tour guide character. It's a first-person memoir it's based on. He's the fish out of water, even though he's a fish who's been living in the water for a while. But it was always through the character of Jake's eyes, through Ansel's eyes, that we got to know the people around him and the city. But by the time we got to season 2, he was so deeply intertwined with all the different subcultures that are shown in the show that the tapestry just came alive in such a huge way that we were able to get much more deeply into the characters and the performances of all the other actors around him. And our cast is, there's people like Ken Watanabe and Rinko Kikuchi who are known here, but even the rest of our cast, down to the supporting players, they're all big stars in Japan.
It's just a superstar.
So having that cast of thoroughbreds and being able to work much more deeply on their character and on their stories is something that I think really helped the show come alive in season 2.
Well, you guys climbed an incredible mountain to bring us 2 amazing seasons of television. It's been a pleasure working with you both. So thank you very, very much. I appreciate it.
And thank you so much, Sarah, for all the support.